See, not just straight forward and back. Even like the best functional gyms, I find that they almost do too much what's called frontal plane movement, where they're just moving into squats or lunges. So you really want to be doing like the stanky leg with your hip and exercise. We want to be rotating like in and out. We want to be stepping to the sides and stepping backwards to really maintain that, because the stronger our hips are and pelvic floor, we say, it's almost like a mirror to our pelvic floor. So the healthier your hips are, the healthier your pelvic floor is. So that's definitely an area during pregnancy when we're strength training that we want to focus on.
Welcome to the Mind in My Wellness podcast, your podcast for all things macros, movement, mindset, and everything in between.
Hello, my friends, and welcome back to another episode of the Mind in My Wellness podcast. And let me just say, I am buzzing. Maybe because I'm halfway through my pregnancy and it very much relates to me, but I know it's going to relate to a lot of you too, who are going through your first, your second, or maybe planning for your first pregnancy, and you're trying to get ahead in some education, or maybe you're postpartum and you really want to help with the recovery process. This episode is for you. Today, I met with Amy and Krystle. Amy and Krystle are the sister duo behind Expecting and Empowered, a pregnancy and postpartum fitness company aimed at helping women navigate this challenging time with safe and effective workouts. They use their combined expertise and credentials to educate women on Instagram, as well as developed an at-home workout app to meet women exactly where they are in their motherhood journey. Krystle is a practicing women's health physical therapist and certified pregnancy and postpartum corrective exercise specialist. And Amy is a registered nurse, doula, and a personal trainer. So together, they've helped thousands of women just like you avoid the common aches and pains associated with pregnancy, and empowered women across the globe to heal safely postpartum from either a vaginal or cesarean birth. In today's episode, we talked all about the benefits of strength training during pregnancy, what the pelvic floor is and how to work with it throughout pregnancy for a smoother birth and recovery postpartum, how to address pregnancy pains throughout the body, lots about Kegels, whether or not it's okay to start strength training for the first time during pregnancy, and so much more. So let's jump on into this episode. Hi, Krystle. Hi, Amy. I'm so excited to have you guys on the podcast today to talk all things strength training throughout pregnancy. I am so excited to have you guys here.
Hi, thank you, Danny. Thanks for having us.
So excited to be here.
And this is a hot topic for me right now because I'm halfway through my pregnancy and I'm strength training. So I'm really excited to dive in with you guys who are the experts in this and really talk through a lot of the benefits and dive in a little bit deeper into this topic. So to kick things off, why don't you tell us a little bit about the benefits of incorporating strength training throughout pregnancy?
Absolutely. Exactly as you said, when Krystle and I went through pregnancies ourselves, we realized what a tall task it is for the body. And so what we know about strength training is that if you have a program that is safe and developed well, it can really reduce aches and pains. So a lot of people are experiencing backaches, swelling, different pains, SPD that come up. If you strength train, you can really minimize, even maybe avoid some of those. So that's one reason we love it. As you and I were talking about on our podcast yesterday, there's so many benefits to strength training, like boosting energy. I mean, what pregnant woman couldn't use a little bit more energy in her life when she's pregnant? So I think that's a common misconception, as people think it takes energy. But what research shows is it really boosts energy. It boosts mood. It boosts self-esteem. You sleep better. I could go on and on and on about the benefits of strength training, but what we really try to do is help to educate women of why they need to do it. And Krystle and I love to say motherhood takes strength. While you're carrying that baby, and then definitely when you have the baby, your body needs to have the strength to do just the tasks of daily living that you have to do with a baby. So if you're pregnant and if you're listening, we would highly recommend strength training.
Amazing. I know firsthand the impact strength training throughout my pregnancy has had on me so far. And you mentioned energy, and I kid you not, every time I leave the gym, I just feel so energized. And for a while, I actually had to stop strength training at the beginning of my pregnancy, mainly from a hemorrhage that my doctor was like, okay, let's take a step back for a little bit. Granted, it was also first trimester, but as soon as I started strength training again, even in that first trimester, my energy levels just went through the roof, and it helped me so much, even through nausea as well. Have you noticed that when it comes to nausea in first trimester with strength training or just exercise in general?
Absolutely. We hear that a lot. And a lot of our moms that do feel nauseous throughout their pregnancy, they find out what works for them. So we've kind of heard it all. Like some people, if they're moving in the morning, maybe after lunch, they have a good period. So they kind of figure out how to get it in. But then we've heard time and time again, it really does help to minimize, to make them feel better.
In terms of what you recommend from like a programming perspective, because I'll get a lot of DMs about this and I like to refer to others. What do you recommend for strength training throughout pregnancy? Is there like an ideal amount of days someone should be strength training, or areas of focus that should be on those days of strength training?
So research shows that we should be strength training like 2 to 3 times a week. And I know you were a cardio junkie as well as Amy and I ran in college.
Mhm.
So it was like a complete flip when we like really figured it out during pregnancy. And more is coming out about how pivotal strength training is to like overall well-being, and especially during pregnancy and postpartum is a time that you need it the most. There are definitely areas that we want to focus on during pregnancy when we're strength training. So often in the clinic, when I see lots of moms come in that are cardio queens per se, so there were runners or even like volleyball players, people that took a lot of impact in their bodies, they show in studies that even elite athletes, so D1 college athletes, 63 or 67% of them have pelvic floor dysfunction. So even what we would think of as like the healthy person coming into pregnancy, they're not well connected to their core. So in that first trimester, if mom is feeling well, I love to really hammer strength training and reconnecting to that core in the first trimester. So we're thinking about breathing all the way down to our pelvic floor. Maybe we haven't thought about our pelvic floor at all before when we're thinking about strength training. And so we really want to spend this time thinking about reconnecting to this area and also our abdominal wall. Our abdominal wall is going to go under a ton of strain, as everybody can see in pregnancy. So we really want to make sure that we're rebalancing our abs, our back muscles, and we're really maintaining great breathing posture during pregnancy. As pregnancy progresses, which you probably have not hit yet, but there comes a point where there's like less springiness to your body. Like we really love, people feel good when we have options in movement and there's springiness to their body. So a huge area of focus for strength training during pregnancy and postpartum should be that springiness, because that's what makes us feel good. So that is, believe it or not, like our feet. Our feet should be able to absorb and like then propel us forward. If we feel like Captain Morgan and we like need like a few extra steps in the morning when we get out of bed and it's just like peg leg-ish, that doesn't make us feel resilient, you know? So we really want to focus on like the feet to hip combo. During pregnancy, we'll tend to widen our legs outward, almost like our toes start to turn outward. And that will make our hip muscles so tight, which is why a lot of women will feel pressure on the front of their pubic bone. But if we were to move our hips in multiple different directions during pregnancy, not just straight forward and back, even like the best functional gyms, I find that they almost do too much what's called frontal pain movement, where they're just moving into squats or lunges. So you really want to be doing like the stanky leg with your hip and exercise. We want to be rotating like in and out. We want to be stepping to the sides and stepping backwards to really maintain that, because the stronger our hips are in pelvic floor, we say it's almost like a mirror to our pelvic floor. So the healthier your hips are, the healthier your pelvic floor is. So that's definitely an area during pregnancy when we're strength training that we want to focus on. And then as well, the second area that we're going to get huge amounts of spring from is actually our backs, like our mid backs. So getting this area to move will definitely like pay its dividends in the long run. This area innervates our core. So it keeps our core engaged. All the nerves that like basically tell our core what to do come from our mid back. As you can probably already start to experience in your pregnancy, this area by our bra line starts to get super tight. It can kind of get fatigued towards the end of the day. And if you're starting to carry those honkers in the front, something's got to be pulling in the back. So we want to make sure that this area stays mobile. And the only way to make sure it stays mobile is to make sure we're doing strength training in that area. So we love things like chops, reverse flies, love our body moves in diagonal. So like to do a lot of things on one side, well, the legs forward. So like a reverse fly only on one side, but bending forward on the other side. So our body remembers these diagonals because that baby and all of the stuff, so all of the blood volume, everything, the uterus, all of that gets in the way and messes up all of these mechanics, which makes it harder to recover from postpartum as well. So focusing on these things in pregnancy when we're thinking about strength training will pay off big time.
And because that feels so overwhelming to hear Krystle talk about all that, Krystle's a physical therapist. I'm a personal trainer. So we put it all into our app for people because I think for someone listening, they're like, wait, okay, so reverse lunge. Okay. And it's like, if you have it right before you, what we love about our app is that you literally have to press play and do the workout. And then you don't have to worry about all the ins and outs. I love when Krystle explains it because it gives us a reason why to do it. But for the average woman, it's kind of easier to follow. Make sure the program that you're going to follow, they know what they're doing. They have the credentials. They have the experience. If it would be us, we would be honored.
Yeah. It's great to have the knowledge behind it. Like okay, this makes sense. Like this for me, listening to this, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is such good information. Especially as you mentioned, I mean, TMI, but like the gals are getting so big and I am not used to that. I didn't really have boobs before. And I'm feeling that mid back soreness, especially certain times of the day. So listening to a lot of the reasoning behind it makes total sense. To your point, Amy, having an actual action plan can make all the difference because it can make sense, but then you're like, okay, what do I do? You know, I need a game plan. So I love that you guys have your app because it lays all of that out. I also kind of want to backstep because you talked a lot, Krystle, about the pelvic floor. And to be honest, I've heard of the pelvic floor. I mean, it's all over Instagram right now for me because I'm pregnant. So of course, everything is targeting me with pregnancy related content. But the pelvic floor, I thought I knew what that was until I actually started diving in more. It was like, oh, I actually don't really know what the pelvic floor is, how to engage or even like relax the pelvic floor. So can you tell us a little bit about what is the pelvic floor and how can we identify where the pelvic floor is on our body?
Yes. So the pelvic floor is a diamond shaped muscle group at the bottom of our pelvis. So those bones that we sit on that sit on the surface, those muscles are kind of in between there. It's almost like a basket-like structure. People think of the pelvic floor as honestly usually just for sexual reasons. And there's so many roles that the pelvic floor plays. So one of those is that pelvic stability that we talked about, creating that like balance and health and wellness in the pelvis. We also can transfer force. You know, like when your body feels fluid, we can transfer force when we're picking up groceries and then churning, putting them in the car. That force is transferred right from our legs to our upper body as we put it in the SUV. It also helps support pelvic organs. So it helps support our bladder, the uterus, which is very important during pregnancy, and then the rectum. So it also keeps us continent or incontinent. Those muscles will close and relax. And when they close, obviously we can hold back urine or even feces. People have problems with that as well. And then for sexual function. I feel like people know that the pelvic floor is for this, but the healthier pelvic floor is, the better and the easier it is to become aroused. And so the healthier we keep this during pregnancy too, that's just an added benefit, right? Because we're all tired from growing a baby and we still want that to be an important part of our lives. And then, so how do we feel them? Because it is shown in research that most people do Kegels incorrectly, actually. So in the clinic too, you'll see that a lot where I'm like, okay, do a Kegel. And they're actually bearing down or pushing down. So Kegels work like this. Our body should kind of be automated. But like I said, because of injury, like if you've fallen on your bottom in sports before, got like hit from the side, all of these things can be set out of whack. So when the pelvic floor is healthy, when we inhale, so when we're breathing air in and down, the pelvic floor should relax. It's almost like the waves of an ocean, when like the waves come into the beach and then go back out. So as we exhale, our pelvic floor should lift up and rise up again. So if we can work on breathing, our pelvic floor will usually come along for the ride. But when we do a Kegel, we want to think about lifting up as we exhale. So lifting towards the head. So I think about my tailbone pulling towards the belt line, or often people will say like sucking a smoothie, like a straw, that smoothie up into your vagina. So that nice lift. I can even take my hands and wrap them down there around my sits bones area. And then I want my fingers pointed towards my nose, and I can feel my tissue lift off of my fingers. And then what's equally as important, and this is like one of my soapbox things, because this is what they do on Instagram and it like drives me nuts. And I know our attention spans are short, so we got to like sum it up. But in any muscle, right, we want strength and relaxation. Like you wouldn't walk around all day like T-Rex with your bicep curled all day. We wouldn't want to walk around with our pelvic floor tightened all day. So we also need to be able to relax. In addition, right, with the bicep, if we wanted our bicep stronger, we have to do bicep curls, just like we have to Kegel. And then we also want the pelvic floor to work well with other muscles. So we really want both that relaxation and contraction, because we need strength during pregnancy. When people are like, your baby is the size of a pumpkin, guess what that pumpkin is resting on? Your pelvic floor. So we want strength, but towards the end of pregnancy, we want the pelvic floor to fully relax, because actually the pelvic floor does not push your baby out. It's the uterus that does. So the tighter our pelvic floor is, if you haven't worked on it, it will be tight at the end of pregnancy. If it is tight, that is when you can see more tearing, more problems with labor and delivery, and then of course, recovery on the other side.
I love that you're bringing this up, because previously, I mean, again, a lot of this is new for me. So as I was coming into it, I thought it was, oh, you always just want to work on strengthening that pelvic floor. I never really knew much about relaxing that pelvic floor and the importance of that as well. So it's kind of like a twofold approach to it, and thought that the pelvic floor was going to help push baby out. And in reality, it's that loosening of that pelvic floor, or relaxing, if you will, of that pelvic floor. Is there a recommendation for how often you recommend doing Kegels? I know for me, and I'd love your opinion on this, I will do it occasionally just when I'm going to the bathroom. Like if I'm going pee, I'll just like hold it and then I'll go and then I'll hold it. I don't know. I've heard that that is considered a Kegel, but I'm curious your opinion on that approach, and also how often you recommend incorporating Kegels into your pregnancy, and if it changes throughout trimester.
Yes, it definitely changes throughout the trimester. So in the very beginning, in like first trimester, we actually want to learn how to do both really well. So you can too incorporate it through the day, just like you were doing. And I bet you would get a little bit more bang for your buck if you would do it right before you worked out. Because basically, if we're disconnected with this area, then if we teach our brain right before we work out, like, hey, remember the pelvic floor? Because during working out, we should be using that. So you could try doing, we call it ski jump Kegels, where you stand up. And then do you know in the Olympics when they go over those like crazy jumps and you're like, I would never ever do that. I mean, maybe somebody listening may do it, but I ain't doing it. But you're like leaning forward towards the counter. That makes our pelvic floor in the front more activated, which that can be sleepy. That's why you see a lot of moms peeing. especially people that are athletes, we like love a great contraction. We're like the best butthole squeezers in town because you squeeze the back of the pelvic floor. And so we want to learn how to squeeze the front of it. So doing it right before you exercise is so great. The problem with doing it while you're peeing is our body, I like being lazy with the body. Like our body should work in automation. So if we do it when we're peeing, our body should automatically be relaxing as we urinate. And so we might trick our brains into tightening, keeping our pelvic floor a little bit tighter. Although it's so convenient, is it? I'm like peeing. The other good time you could try to do it is during intercourse too, because you can really feel it around there. So that would be another like daily or bi-daily or however
I don't know if
frequently.
anyone's having sex daily.
Yeah. Like, wow. I'm sorry, Eric.
But that'd be another great way to add it in when you're like, hey, I'm thinking about this area.
Yeah.
Well, relaxing
Okay, I
it
like
too is super easy to do because we can just get in optimal positions to do that. When you're in the doorway, you can hold on to the doorway or your counter, like your sink top by your kitchen, and then get into a deep squat position. This helps really open the whole pelvic floor. And then, like, really thinking about relaxing or untucking our tails. A lot of us are so busy, our body tends to naturally hold tension in our pelvic floor. So if we think we're like a tiger, most of us are walking around with our tail tucked and just like relaxing your tiger tail, untucking it, lifting it up like you're going to pass a fart.
I like these. These are very clear descriptions that I'm like, okay, I know how to do this. So I appreciate that. That's awesome. And then in terms of pelvic floor activity or really the focus on pelvic floor, is there a recommendation throughout your trimesters in terms of, you kind of mentioned already early on, if you can kind of master both of those, and then how does it progress throughout pregnancy?
Yes. So in the second and third trimester, we still like to do some of the strength training, but actually if you get in positions where all of the weight of the baby is not down on your pelvic floor can actually do its thing. So hands and knees is a great position to work on pelvic floor stuff in that for strength purposes. And two, I wanted to like just mention that C-section moms are not exempt to working on their pelvic floor. So again, C-section moms have to hold up the weight of the baby. Some people know they're going to have C-sections during pregnancy. I remember my third feeling like just a lot more pressure down there. And I was like, dang, I got to get on this again. I got to start doing my pelvic floor stuff because that whole core is so important. And then third trimester, we really do focus heavily, like a lot. We barely have any strength stuff in there. We do have some because if you don't have strength, your pelvic floor will tighten. But during the third trimester, we really focus on relaxing your pelvic floor. So you can like lift your butt cheek, like if you lay on your side and then put your hand by that bone again and lift up towards the ceiling, you'll see in the Expecting an Empowered Pregnancy app. And that is helping stretch out the pelvic floor, getting in positions like in that deep squat position, working on our hip internal and external rotation during third trimester are really going to help be able to relax the pelvic floor as labor and delivery goes on.
I noticed that inside your guys' app because that's what I'm going to be using throughout this pregnancy as I, really focus on this area just because I've, started hearing all the benefits of it. You mentioned too postpartum. So how can this focus now? It's very clear that it can help throughout pregnancy, but then the postpartum timeframe, how does the attention to this throughout pregnancy really help with recovery there?
Yeah, in the postpartum guide, it's honestly reverse engineering. If you think about it too, it is kind of quite sad how quickly you lose strength and stuff. And your job in the postpartum, that initial postpartum period is recovery, right? So we're like not pushing people to get back at things, but there has to be intention to reconnecting with your body in that postpartum period. And you guys, daily, I see people in the clinic that regret the decision of just getting, they go to their doctor's 6-week appointment and then they just get back into being a runner. Runners love to run. CrossFitters love to CrossFit, like they just get back into whatever they were doing. And I kind of hang out with them for years sometimes, like they're in my clinic a long time because they basically just pass go. Amy used to cheat in Monopoly all the time. And this is what people do when they
happen. To be clear.
No, actually it's me. I just like to win. When people don't do their core stuff though, so in that postpartum period, again, it's almost like we connect with the core, the abs, the back, Then we do simple dynamic movements. Then we do crazy dynamic movements. So you can do what you want, but it has to be a step-by-step progression. And it steps up quickly, but at first it seems very basic, and athletes have a hard time slowing themselves down to do that. So it's like a mindset, like a long-term mindset for your own well-being.
And here's what I'll say is when Krystle's mentioning her clinic, so she's got a physical therapy clinic and she's seeing pregnant and postpartum women all the time. So she basically gets a front row seat to see what they're coming in with. What are the aches and pains that they're coming in with? And then in our programming, she puts it in so that people can hopefully prevent that from happening. So it's really cool to have someone that's hands on the body of these women. She sees the patterns, and then we made something where anyone can do it to try to avoid these things that can happen.
I love that. I want to kind of pivot back to strength training a little bit. I love diving into the pelvic floor because, again, for me personally, this was just a topic that there was a big question mark around it. So I appreciate you, Krystle, diving in deeper to it. In terms of strength training during pregnancy, I think there are a lot of misconceptions, especially from a long time ago. But as we've progressed and learned more, what are some of those common misconceptions that you see?
Yeah. So, Danny, it's kind of like we talked about with nutrition on our podcast. And there's people that are still believing things that were studied. There was a study done in 1985 that said we should only have our heart rate get to 140 during pregnancy. That has since been completely debunked. That is not the standard that is recommended or that we go by. So now what we recommend is that people do what is called the talk test. So basically, in the peak of your exercise, are you able to still form a sentence? That is going to be a better indicator when you're pregnant of how you're working than your heart rate. So, but we hear all the time, like OBs are still saying, don't go above 140, don't lift above 20 pounds, like all of this stuff that just isn't true. I think another one that we do really well with is this idea that you shouldn't work on your abs during pregnancy. And what Krystle really loves to point out from her physical therapy lens is the fact that no matter what, we are going to be calling on our core and our pelvic floor in our daily movement. Like there's no way around it. So why don't we instead learn what movements we still can do during pregnancy to help protect and make stronger our core? And then the last one that I'll call out, and this one is still very prevalent, this myth, is that if you didn't work out before pregnancy, you cannot start during. And that is just has proven to be untrue. In fact, what we know now is that if you stay sedentary during your whole pregnancy, the risk factors are going to go up far higher than if you engage in activity. So what we really love to tell people, pregnancy, as you're figuring out, as you're expanding, it takes a lot of strength. It is not easy. If we can support our bodies with strength training, even if it wasn't something we participated in before, it is going to do so much good. Krystle and I love to share that a lot of the moms that come into Expecting and Empowered, we try to find them during their first pregnancy like you. Sometimes we don't. And they come in their second pregnancy, and then they send us this email that is about 5 paragraphs long, how much we changed their pregnancy the second time around because they strength trained. They feel so much better. They didn't have the aches and pains. We talked about on our podcast, it's not just like the way you look. It's truly the fact that if you're living in pain, it's really hard for you to have good days. So what we're trying to do is strengthen the body so that you can have more good days, feel yourself. And pregnancy is exciting and you're able to cherish it a little bit more if you feel good.
I'm so glad you brought up that last point because I actually had a question for you in terms of if someone listening is like, okay, I'm sign me up, like I'm on board, I want to start strength training, but I'm new to strength training. I've seen that information circulating where it's like, if you haven't done this before you were pregnant, don't start when you're pregnant. And so that was one of my questions. I'm glad you brought that up. So for anybody listening who is really resonating and is like, ooh, yeah, I want to check out your app, or, I want to start strength training during pregnancy. Where is it that you recommend that they begin with their journey?
Yeah. So, like I said before, I mean, we would be totally honored if you guys all came inside of our app. We want to offer the code wellness20. So, we'll give you a discount. We also have a 7-day free trial. Come on in, because what we did is that when Krystle and I were pregnant and then when we had little kids, it was much easier for us to work out at home. And so we developed this program where it takes minimal equipment. It really takes minimal experience. You're going to have the model in front of you doing exactly what she wants you to do. So we've really taken out a lot of the barriers, because it does, as a personal trainer, break my heart when people are just too intimidated to even go into the weight section. And I think as women, we're starting to learn how important it is. But I still understand the barrier of like, you feel like you don't know what you're doing. And so what we tried to do is make it much easier. So like Krystle said before, if you could even do 2 days a week and just give it a shot, see how you feel with some strength training incorporated, I would highly recommend that. We're also the type of company that's like, start small. You know, if it for you, it's putting on some shoes and going for a 20-minute walk to start moving, I think that you're going to see what everyone's talking about. Because I think when you don't exercise and you hear women that do exercise talk about it, you're like, are they delusional? That does not feel good. That does not sound good. I would rather do something else. When you just start simple movements, nothing crazy, you'll start to see what everyone's talking about. Because one thing that I've been really open about is that it's so huge for my mental health. So moving my body, strength training, walking, it helps me so much as a mom to control, my moods and to make me feel really well. So that's what we're hoping for the people listening.
Amazing. I'm glad you mentioned that too, because it's more than just the physical, for sure. Well, thank you guys so much. This was I selfishly loved this episode because I learned so much in it. So thank you both so much for taking the time and hopping on today and talking all things strength training and pregnancy and pelvic floor. Where can my listeners find you guys?
Well, Danny, thanks so much for having us. It's like yesterday when we were chatting on our podcast and I'm asking to approve my lunch. Like, was this a good? Like we're just trying to get people good information just the same as you are. And like, how can we make women feel really good? So you guys can find us at Expecting and Empowered everywhere. We hang out the most on Instagram. We give out, I would say, the most free information that you could get about having a healthy physical pregnancy. And we also have a podcast. So Danny was just on ours. You can go over and listen to that episode, but you can find us at the Expecting and Empowered podcast as well.
I also just want to say, I second what you just said about your Instagram. You have so much great content on your Instagram. So please, please, please go and check them out, because it has been so helpful for me as I've gone through, the last few weeks of my pregnancy. And now because I'm looking at you guys so much, you guys keep popping up to the top of my feed. So I'm like, yes. But amazing. All right. Thank you guys so much again for joining, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning into this episode. Make sure to hit that subscribe button to follow along and catch all future episodes to help you look and feel like the best version of you. I'll see you in the next episode.